What up, and welcome back to another Malazan Book of the Fallen video. We got kind of a clickbaity title, but I think you're going to find that it's a little bit on the nose too. Let's get into it. So it's a little bit different kind of video, and there are going to be spoilers, so if you're a noob to the books or you haven't read past Memories of Ice, but really through the whole thing, I think you should jump out now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. So for everyone that's left, I just absolutely love this character because I think it's just a kind of symptom of how like trope subverting and in your face and like tip the conventional wisdom on its head these books are, because for me, one of the most compassionate characters, at least, maybe not the most compassionate. I think Tavor, maybe Shadow Throne, gives him a run for his money. We're talking about the god of death himself. And how like original is that, right? Because when you think of death, it's like bad, evil, and to make this god of death actually somebody who is sympathetic to the struggles and the plight of all these different characters in the book. And there's many different episodes where you see him kind of touched by, people's sacrifices or whatever the case may be, with Talk, with Bowden, and we have a lot of depictions of death in other, like movies and stuff like that. You have like the Bill and Ted's type of death where he's like, loves showing up and taking the lives and bringing them back and whatever, and that's like, how he kind of gets his kicks or whatever. And then you also have like the like Meet Joe Black type of death, who he's kind of like indifferent. It's just a job. There's no like emotional connection. They're portrayed as being very disconnected and things like that because they kind of have to be, because they're out there claiming lives, I guess, of good and bad people, but Hood's actually like invested, and what's crazy is that he doesn't really relish, it's not like he's sitting back going, yes, more deaths and war, and I can't wait, and we're gonna just fill up our realm, and I'm gonna get all these subjects, and that he's like celebrating death. That is not the case at all. In fact, you see, again, throughout the books, many times where he shows empathy, shows compassion, where he's really touched by what others do, where he, ultimately, if you look at his arc through the whole books, that he ends up being on the quote-unquote right side, as it were, to the extent that there are right and wrong sides in this story. And especially if you, like, bring in the kind of origin story that we get of Hood from Kharkanas, and I'm spacing out on his wife's name, but really the whole, path to becoming the god of death is because his wife gets maliciously killed, and instead of getting all pissed off and taking it out on the folks who actually, directly killed her, he instead has the kind of audacious plan to wage war on death itself, so that not just himself, but everyone thereafter, and all these folks who've been hurt by, death and losing loved ones, etc., presumably, won't have to go through that anymore, or at least that there will be a kind of different spin to it. It isn't totally clear to me what the overarching objective was, or if what Hood thought was going to happen during Kharkanas is, if what actually ended up happening, I guess, is what he was planning to have happen when he waged his war with death, rather than just kind of assuming the leadership of the realm where dead folks go. I mean, obviously folks were still dying throughout, but what a compassionate character that he's felt, he feels too much, right? That he's got so many emotions that he kind of dedicates his life to trying to prevent stuff like that, or ameliorate or whatever the effects that he's had to go through. Pretty deep feels type of thing for someone to do. Certainly not somebody who's just this like cold-blooded, merciless body count stacker, right? And you see what a dude he actually is, right? Like, think about Dust of Dreams, when Talk finally, I guess, I don't know if it's finally or for like the multiple time, right, buys the farm, and his life is something worthy of being honored by Hood, and he, you know, personally escorts him through the gates. Look what he does for Bauchelain, right? Like, Bauchelain, I know, is a controversial character, although I think everybody should go out and read that latest Fellison article to see some of Ericsson's perspective on Bauchelain. But I think it also speaks volumes that Hood stepped up, and after that sacrifice, which some see as heroic, or at least trying to make amends or what have you, that obviously touched the god of death, and he steps in and again wants to honor that sacrifice. He recognizes it, and it pulls on him, right, and it hits him in the feels or whatever, and then Bauchelain ends up becoming the new like knight of death or whatever. And so you know, just another example of where people are kind of and say whatever you want about Bauchelain, but he didn't ultimately give up the job, and although he was a broken person and that relationship was fraught to say the least, and I thought that was cool, because like in some ways Hood's kind of the stand-in for us there in a way too, and I just found that pretty powerful. And you see the same kind of thing in Memories of Ice with the Maib, right, or the Maibi, because you know Hood is a big part of that, and trying to you know, get stuff sorted out so that she can kind of live with an element of peace and not actually cross through his gate, but instead like just be able to enjoy that kind of dreamland. And again, this comes back not just because he was a nice guy or somebody like lobbied for it or whatever, but again, he sees the kind of plight, you know, the tough time that she had to endure, what she had to give up basically for the good of you know, this bigger mission against the Crippled God and for Silver Fox, etc., etc. And instead of just, you know, going, well, that's just how it goes, and people are people, and I'm the god of death, and hey, it's just one more body, you know, he steps in and intervenes, and you know, does these nice gestures, and again really honors the kind of the dignity of these people that have earned you know, I think a lot of our respect, or you know, at least our consideration. Even if you look at like Memories of Ice, right, he like makes the deal with Trake so that he doesn't go through the, you know, Hood's gate or whatever, and can ascend to become the full god of war, and that's like predicated on a body count, right? And so part of that deal was like, that's why Trake picks Gruntle, and Gruntle just goes through and straight up wrecks shop on everybody. Part of that was to fulfill like this deal basically with Hood, but even there, and it's kind of like the opposite of like some of these super like woke friends that I have, right, where it's like even in their like most generous state, it's like about stunting and showing how charitable or generous or whatever you are. So it's like even in your generosity, you're selfish. But that's kind of like analogous to this thing that I'm talking about with Hood, because even in his like moments of mass murder, right, A, he's not like relishing the mass murder, but B, if you got to do mass murder, at least it's against the quote-unquote bad guys, and C, it's really for this greater endgame goal of swelling his ranks so that they can really, you know, make a significant impact in terms of, you know, fighting back against chaos. And so even in his kind of most, you know, atrocity driven mode, in some ways there's kind of like an admirable goal, or ends justify the means, I don't want to say that, but kind of a slant that you can put on it, even when he's like being, you know, disgusting and ultimately making deals that are going to result in huge body count. Right, because on the one hand, he feels for the Maibi, he feels for Bauchelain and Talk, and you know, all of this stuff. He even like sacrifices himself to help achieve Rake's plan, fight against chaos, and ultimately like do you know, the right thing. But like in this act of you know, being a total badass, right, and like going out and slaying and all that stuff, he's actually doing it for this like deeper purpose, which is totally cool. It's weird because I'm watching this like Raised by Wolves show, and it's all about like faith and should you be allowed to have faith, and it got me thinking about like religion and stuff like that, because I'm not a religious person, and just trusting on faith was, you know, as somebody who lost their parents young and stuff like that, I always kind of you know, your faith really is just that. You're trusting, right? You can't explain. There's no way of knowing for sure. And so it is about just trusting. And it was hard for me to like kind of process, like, how could such bad things happen to good people? Who could premeditate something like that if there's some like omniscient force? And you know, for me, I think having a view of like gods like this, where they're less deliberately like plotting and scheming individual deaths, and even the god of death himself kind of, you know, it isn't like he's holding up the kind of religious litmus test and saying, you know, for somebody like my dad, oh, they weren't Christians, so then they're going to go to hell or whatever. You know, it was more about, this is like a role that they play, and they're kind of honoring the dignity and giving respect to these lives and kind of bridging them to this other side. And it isn't a kind of assigning of good deeds and bad deeds or anything like that. And you know, for me, that's like a comforting way to think about those that we've lost, right? That it wasn't that they were just part of a sacrifice in some larger scheme or something like that, but more so that this is like kind of a fact of life, that death is part of life, and that you know, here's a way that we can kind of conceptualize, you know, folks making that journey with, again, some kind of modicum of having folks there, or, you know, people who are going to, I guess, respect the value of the life that you lived. And that's what kind of makes it so cool too about the bridge burners being the ones that ultimately take over and becoming the guardians of the bridge between life and death. And I tried and I couldn't find the exact quote. If somebody finds it, drop it down below and let me know what chapter, because I want to go look it up. But there was a time when folks, I think, were talking about dying, and I can't remember if it was Fiddler or Dead Smell or Hedge, but they're talking about how they're comforted, right? That instead of having this big, scary, unknown kind of demon monster, which Hood ultimately ends up getting stereotyped as over the millennia, but having people there who are true like guardians and shepherds and friends, and these empathetic, compassionate soldiers who are going to, again, honor that kind of loss and be there as kind of companions on that journey across to death, I just thought was such a cool concept. And again, usually you think of like death, bad, life, good, right? Like creation, positive, destruction, negative. But I think it kind of, this book and this character in general kind of like tips all of that on its head. And it's kind of part of a broader theme too, where in some ways it's like the more badass you are, then it was like the more compassionate, which is usually the exact opposite, right? Like you're just this mindless, bloodthirsty killer. But this is like part of a bigger pattern in the books themselves, not just in the context of death. You see like Traveler, right, who, you know, no bigger badass than that, helping out Eriko, helping out Kyle. You have Gruntle obviously stepping up in the wake of these, crazy atrocities, and just nobody is the bigger badass than Gruntle, but he's like crying when his friends die, right? He's so impacted by what happens to Stani. He's looking out for Harlow, and so it's like the harder, the kind of hard candy shell, than the softer, the kind of gooey interior of the M&M, right? So these are like bulletproof M&Ms with straight up like chocolate mousse on the inside, and you see that across the board. Like I think the bigger the badass, the more bulletproof the outside and the gooier the inside, which is, for me, that's the jam. That's what we want to be, the message we want to be sending out there. You see Whiskey Jack, right? Who, again, giving Calor a run for his money, could spar with the Sem, all of that. Like, look at him with the Ten Scoury. Look at him at the end of Gardens of the Moon, where he's feeling for his, soldiers, and like not wanting to let himself feel those feelings because he's realizing they're his friends, right? Or he doesn't want Rake to have to bear the burden of putting all these Ten Scoury into the, into Dragney Poor, and so again, just huge badass, mad, emotional depth and intellect, or however the poetic way is to describe somebody who's like, you know, in touch and knows what up on the emotional side and can still totally kick your ass. Fiddler totally gets like Mappo and Akarium, right? Like you get, you know, Beak and and if you don't feel like Fiddler and Beak are total badasses, then I would definitely challenge you on that. But it's just a really cool kind of juxtaposition that's not the normal way that we think of strength, right? Like strength is either you're like a poet and feeler or whatever, or you can go out and kick ass. And this is like, to be a badass Malazan, you kick ass and you feel. And like, that's not to say, you know, even though I think Hood is an incredibly compassionate character, like, he's not a perfect person. He's killing, he's scheming, he's, you know, doing all the stuff with Sem and his daughter, and kind of like a lot of manipulation. He's super bitter about getting Dunsparrow Jack from him, right? And ultimately probably the reason why Whiskey Jack died, and why Mallet never found the time to be able to heal that knee. So, yeah, he's no angel.
How dare you?
But ultimately, he's also like a really compassionate and like sympathetic kind of person. Plus, he's just also like an incredible badass, right? He runs that squad of like 14 Jagat generals who just absolutely wreck shop. That would be an amazing side story. Erickson, you want to write that Jagat army side story? That would be pretty dope. But yeah, man, he fights against chaos. He gets inside Dragnipor. He eats faces. He does it all. So, and he does it all while being that kind of compassionate empathizer that still, you know, after millennia, finds a way to feel and finds a way to honor people who are making sacrifices and putting, you know, kind of bigger goals above themselves and trying to do what they feel like is right. And so for me, I thought that was just a totally cool aspect of these books that we have. You know, here we have the God of Death who's supposed to be out ripping and tearing and killing and all of that, and instead it's this guy who's like singing, you know, super emo, depressing music because he can't handle all these good people who are going under. And for me, that's just a really comforting thought. So yeah, I don't know why I made this video. It's just been something that's been kicking around. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about the God of Death, Hood. I know he's a favorite of a lot of people. My boy Notorious HBP took him as his namesake, Hood's Bony Prang, and you know, we use the Hood Warren, Hood's Path in the Discord all the time. So yeah, hope you like that video. Let me know what you think down below. Like and subscribe. Do some merch or join the Patreon, become a member on the channel, whatever. Join that Discord because we do love to chat it up. And yeah, until the next video, happy reading.